Zootopia 2 begins like a familiar return to a world that once promised harmony, but very quickly it reveals that this is not a victory lap, it is a reckoning. 2 years after the events of the first film, Judy Hopps and Nick Wilde are still partners at the ZPD, still solving cases together, still symbols of a supposedly reformed city. But beneath that surface, cracks are showing, and the film makes it clear from the start that this sequel is not just about catching another villain. It is about confronting the way Zootopia itself was built. What if the problem was never just Bellwether but the foundations of the city all along? And what happens when inclusion isn't just about changing hearts but redesigning structures? If you have not seen the film yet, spoiler warning. Judy and Nick's relationship is strained in a way that feels painfully real. They are still brilliant together, but the emotional trust that once defined their partnership has frayed. Judy is under intense pressure to prove that the ZPD is truly reformed, that her department is now fair, accountable, and progressive. Nick, shaped by a lifetime of exclusion, is more skeptical. He sees patterns where Judy still wants to believe in good intentions. Their mandated counseling sessions with Dr. Fusby become a surprising emotional backbone of the film. Isn't it interesting how their personal conflict mirrors the city's largest struggle, wanting to look perfect while avoiding the messier work of real change? Into this fragile dynamic arrives Gary the Snake, Zootopia's first established reptile resident. His presence alone shakes the city because reptiles were never part of Zootopia's original design. The climate, the architecture, the public spaces, none of it was built with them in mind. Unlike the first film's predator crisis, this is not about biology or danger, it is about belonging and legitimacy. Why does Gary have to justify his right to exist in a city that claims to be for everyone? Judy and Nick are assigned to investigate strange incidents linked to Gary's arrival, missing artifacts, stolen blueprints, and odd disturbances in old, neglected districts. At first, everything points to Gary as a criminal, but as they dig deeper, they uncover a hidden history of Zootopia that has deliberately been buried. They learn that reptiles were never absent by accident. They were excluded by design, written out of official records, and erased from the city's story. Gary has not been stealing, he has been reclaiming pieces of reptile culture that were appropriated and displayed without credit. In that moment, the case transforms from a crime investigation into a moral one. Who is really breaking the law here? The snake trying to reclaim his history, or the city that took it in the first place? This leads them to the powerful Lynxley family, a dynasty that has quietly shaped Zootopia's infrastructure and public narrative for generations. The Lynxleys present themselves as philanthropists and civic leaders, but their influence is built on maintaining a version of Zootopia that benefits certain species while sidelining others. Their control over zoning, museums, and historical archives reveal how exclusion can be institutionalized without ever being spoken aloud. Isn't that one of the most chilling ideas in the film, that injustice doesn't always look like cruelty, but like bureaucracy? Pawbert Lynxley, a younger member of the family, becomes one of the film's most thematically important figures. He's not a mustache-twirling villain, but an anxious heir desperate to prove himself. When he betrays Gary and injects Judy with venom, it is not because he personally hates reptiles, but because he wants to secure his place within a powerful family that profits from their exclusion. His betrayal functions like a dark rite of passage, loyalty to power over loyalty to people. In that moment, Pawbert embodies how unjust systems reproduce themselves through the next generation. The film asks, would you have the courage to challenge your own family if their legacy was built on harm? Or would you, like Pawbert, choose belonging over justice? The venom scene is both a plot climax and a symbolic one. Pawbert weaponizes something associated with reptiles to protect a system that stigmatizes them, showing how power twists narratives to justify itself. Judy's vulnerability in that moment is not just physical, it represents the fragility of her faith in the institution she serves. Nick's desperate rescue, breaking free to deliver anti-venom, becomes a declaration that their bond matters more than appearances, more than procedure, more than the system itself. Isn't it powerful that the emotional turning point of the film is not about catching a villain but choosing each other? As the truth about the Lynxleys is exposed, Zootopia is forced to confront how deeply its exclusion of reptiles is woven into its history. Gary's actions are reframed not as criminal, but as a demand for recognition and accommodation. The city begins to initiate structural changes, retrofitting infrastructure, acknowledging erased histories, and creating space for species that were never meant to be there. This is where Zootopia 2 distinguishes itself from the first film. The original focused on changing attitudes. The sequel insists that attitudes are not enough if the system itself remains unchanged. But does the film go far enough, or does it risk presenting reform as simpler than it really is? Pawbert's betrayal also acts as a dark mirror to Judy and Nick's friendship arc, where Pawbert chooses loyalty to power, Judy and Nick ultimately choose accountability and repair. Their conflict could easily have ended in bitterness or professional distance, but instead they confront their fears in therapy, admit their flaws, and recommit to each other. Their personal reconciliation becomes a miniature version of what Zootopia itself is trying to achieve, moving from denial to honesty, from surface level harmony to genuine inclusion. Do you see their friendship as a hopeful model for real world change or an idealized fantasy? Gary's story forces Zootopia to reckon with a painful truth: a city can celebrate diversity while still being structurally hostile to certain groups. The film suggests that inclusion is not just about welcoming newcomers, but about interrogating who benefited from their absence. The Lynxleys are not cartoon villains. They are embodiments of a system that prefers comfort over justice, and Pawbert's fear of losing status makes clear how hard it can be for those within power to challenge it. Isn't that tension between security and fairness one of the central dilemmas of modern society? Meanwhile, Nick and Judy's evolving partnership reflects the emotional labor of allyship. Judy learns that being a good cop does not mean blindly defending the institution, while Nick recognizes that skepticism does not have to turn into isolation. Their growth parallels Zootopia's slow structural shift, suggesting that meaningful change requires both personal and systemic transformation. But is that balance achievable in the real world, or is it an optimistic simplification? By the end, Zootopia is not magically perfect. The floodgates of history have opened, but the work of repair has only begun. Gary is no longer an anomaly, but a catalyst for a city that must now live up to its own ideals. Judy and Nick are stronger together, yet still aware that their partnership exists within a flawed system. The film refuses a tidy resolution, landing instead in a quiet, complicated middle ground. Zootopia has moved forward, but not far enough to be complacent. What makes Zootopia 2 so compelling is that it shifts the conversation from individual prejudice to structural exclusion. The first film asked whether predators and prey could coexist. The sequel asks whether a city built on hidden hierarchies can ever truly be equitable. Pawbert's betrayal, the Lynxleys' influence, Gary's reclamation of history, and Judy and Nick's emotional journey all converge around the same question: what does real belonging look like? Is it enough to be welcomed, or must the very spaces we inhabit be remade? So when the film ends, we are left with a more mature, uneasy vision of Zootopia. Not a utopia, but a work in progress, messy, flawed, and still striving. Perhaps that is the film's greatest strength. It does not pretend that justice is easy, but it insists that it is necessary. And it asks us, gently but firmly, to reflect on our own cities, our own institutions, and our own relationships. If Zootopia can change, what might that mean for us? And if it can't, what does that say about the systems we live in every day? Thank you for listening. I appreciate it.